First off, I need to let you know that we are going to be recording this talk, so you should turn off your video if you don't want to be in the recording. Also, if you can all mute yourself if you haven't already, but I think you all have, so good. Thank you.
When the sound is way down.
Okay, I'm going to continue. My name is Cynthia Segovia from Artists for Democracy. Welcome to the fourth talk in our Artists for Democracy Artist Talk series. We are so excited to have Scott Benzel here talking to us today. We believe that the most important action you can take right now is to vote. You need to do three main things. Make sure you're registered. Make a voting plan, and vote as early as you can in your state. We have a voter resource page on our website. You can find in the chat with more information. There is a new guide up on the site created by educators Andrea Geyer and Sharon Hayes. This guide helps students register to vote and make a voting plan wherever they are living right now. Many students have been displaced due to COVID-19, so making registration process potentially more confusing. There is a PDF that walks educators and students through the process, so it's gonna be super easy. I'm also a new voter on presidential elections, so I'm totally using these guides. So the link for that is gonna be on the chat. Next week, we are going to have Christina Quorns doing the artist talk, so come back for that for sure. And today's schedule is we're going to hear from Sarana and about healthcare. Then the best part, the amazing A4D member, Luke Harden, will introduce you to Scott, who will give a presentation he developed especially for this talk series. So there is a syllabus he put together that we are linking into the chat. If you have questions for Scott, please enter them in the chat and he will answer them at the end of his talk when he is in conversation with Luke. Then to close out, Lynn will give you a few super important voting tips. So great. Take it away, Sarana.
Hi, everyone. So glad you're here. I'm the A4D's resident healthcare activist. You'll hear from my accent that I didn't grow up here. And I became a healthcare activist basically as soon as I got off the boat, 12 years ago now. I have an extensive list of pre-existing conditions and honestly would only be sitting here because of my access to universal healthcare. So I thought it was really important that Americans should really know what it's like to have universal health care. So I became an activist and would stand up and talk in front of people, which was very awkward for me at the beginning because, like many of you, I'm an artist and I'd rather just be like sitting in my studio working. One of the things we wanted to do is like highlight, so on our website, we've now created a page for, sorry, I'm blanking now, a page for things that you find important. And one of the things that came up was healthcare. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I mean, I'm sure all the people watching this are kind of on the same page. Like, you know, we understand that Trump is not really the best choice for us, for people who are sick, people who are poor. But I think I want to highlight a little bit more about Biden's plan as well. Because I think one of the things that I want to say is that, you know, I came to America, I'm very, like, I believe healthcare is a human right. And I came to America and I had discussions with people about healthcare. And one of the things that I've kind of found is that people think you can get universal healthcare one way or another. And so, for instance, like, people are very disappointed that Biden's healthcare plan is not Medicare for all. But I do want to point out something that will give everyone hope, and that's, you know, many countries that have universal healthcare plans, like Japan, which is literally the best healthcare in the world, pretty much, they have an insurance plan. So you can get universal coverage through insurance plans as long as you regulate those and cap prices. And this is where we get to Biden. Like, one of the things I find really exciting about Biden's plan is that he's going to cap the price on Americans paying for healthcare at 8.5% of their income, which is actually really fantastic, as now it's way, way above that. Obamacare was actually meant, well, Obamacare for someone like me was like a lifeline, because honestly, I wouldn't have had insurance at all without it. But one of the things that's really sad, despite what Trump is doing, tweeting about, he just tweeted from the hospital about, you know, protecting pre-existing conditions, exactly, etc. But actually, he's done very little. Actually, he's done nothing. And one of the things that the GOP and the Trump administration have been doing has slowly been taking away the brick by bricks of the protections that Obamacare gives to particularly poor people. And I think that that's something we have to really think about. One of the things also on the chopping block is Medicaid. Well, Medicare definitely, but Medicaid as well. That is something that really affects people who have little to no income. And I think like that's something that we have to really think about when we look at the two plans. One of the other things that I want to bring up, because, you know, Trump's tweeted that, you know, there's nothing to worry about with COVID, and we know that's absolutely not true, because America has 4% of the world's population, but 21% of the COVID deaths, which is, that's completely insane, and we know this is insane. So all I can say is, like, please wear your mask, don't follow his lead. The other thing I want to point out, which is specifically good for artists and people who, you know, may have lost their insurance during this time, is that Biden's plan offers a protection for people like who have had to go on COBRA, for instance. But his plan will cover 100% of their COBRA spending, which is absolutely amazing. So I can go on and on, but like we have this page where you can see what the issues are, and I'm just going to push it out right here. I don't know if you can see that, but we've made this very comprehensive list of what each of the candidates covers and what they don't cover. I feel like I'm speaking to friends right now, so I probably don't have to go on much more, but I just want to like say thank you so much. Make sure to vote. It's really important. I'm going to pass it to Luke. Thank you.
Hi, tonight I have the pleasure of introducing Scott Benzel as the next speaker in our series of artist talks. These talks are aimed at encouraging voter participation and political engagement among students and faculty across the country, while offering vital perspectives and important information in a, to say the least, tumultuous presidential election year. I was a student of Scott's at Cal Arts, and he is the one who first introduced me to Artists for Democracy. His unique lectures are a deeply investigative dive into scientific analysis and critical theory as a means of exposing the entanglement of meanings within the complex interplay of social, political, and aesthetic systems. Scott Benzel's sculptures, installations, performances, and photographs function both as deep investigations of cultural histories and as pieces in a coded game of chance. Each work embeds an element of risk, sometimes via a performative creative process, sometimes by framing chance encounters in the context of an exhibition. Benzel's work has been exhibited or performed at the J.P. Getty Museum, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, Museum of Contemporary Art, Los Angeles, LAX Art, the Mack Center for Art and Architecture, the Palm Springs Art Museum, and the Contemporary Art Museum, St. Louis, and was featured in Made in LA 2012 at the Hammer Museum. Solo exhibitions include recently Bel Ami, Los Angeles, which there should be a link somewhere in the conversation that will take you there. Macaron, New York, Various Small Fires, Los Angeles, Chenene, Paris. Benzel has collaborated with artists including Mike Kelly, Catherine Andrews, and Mark Hagan, and curated exhibitions at the Mack Center for Art and Architecture, the Schindler House, Los Angeles Contemporary Archive, and the Welcome Inn, Eagle Rock, as part of Pacific Standard Time organized by the Getty Museum. Benzel is a member of the faculty of the School of Art at California Institute of the Arts. Artists for Democracy presents to you Scott Benzel.
Great, thank you, Luke. Okay, so I'm just going to jump right into screen sharing and a lecture here. So here we go. Oh, wait, did I forget to turn the sound on? Hold on. I often forget to turn the sound on. Oh, there it is, share computer sound. Okay, so I thought I'd start with just a couple of pieces of artwork that I think relate to the theme, tonight's theme of my artwork that relate to tonight's theme. The first is Altered Circulatory Systems of 2016. You can see it's two framed pieces of currency. The top piece is actually counterfeit currency made by the CIA during the Bay of Pigs attempted invasion, failed invasion of Cuba. The counterfeit currency was supposed to have been, at least the cover story, was that it was to be used by the landing force, who were all native, or primarily native Cubans. However, the CIA seems to have printed hundreds of millions of dollars worth of these bills. So the secondary theory is that these were possibly designed to also to crash the economy. The bottom piece of currency it's a special note that was made by the French resistance during World War II. And so this is actually a collage. It combines a 20 franc note with a small stamp of Hitler that resistance fighters would cut out. And you can see there the Breton fisherman holding his rope, which in this collage that became sort of a secret sign amongst resistance fighters around Hitler's neck from the stamps. This is What Does Possession Mean to You from 2013. This is, some of you will recognize this is after Victor Bergen, who made a piece using exactly the same text and put them up around Newcastle in the UK in, I believe, 1976, maybe slightly later than that. 7% of our population own 84% of the wealth, and those are the numbers from The Economist in 1976. So I'm sure that it's shifted somewhat. It's probably more like 1% of the population owns 90% of the wealth, something along those lines. And then this is from this summer. This is called Klegso Projection 2020. This was part of what was called Drive-By Art. And it was a projection of an artwork generated, a video generated by a machine learning algorithm called StyleGAN. And I'll show you a little bit of it, and then I'll tell you a little bit about what it is. This was in Chinatown in Los Angeles. It was only a couple months ago. So Klegso, as understood or as originated by Kerner, was a process of taking ink blots and projecting into them. I'll read you this little blurb here, a part of it. Justinus Kerner's mid to late 19th century Klegso and automatic drawings derived from ink blots relied on the projection of the artist's and the viewer's imagination onto forms revealed in the ink. Similar techniques were employed by the artists and writers Victor Hugo and George Sand, today considered proto-abstractionists. Kerner's quasi-mystical interpretation of the process was superseded in the 1890s by the psychologists Alfred Binet and Victor Henry's scientific interpretation, which suggested that the presence of recognizable images in the blots was a result of involuntary imagination. Hermann Rorschach, then a medical student training under Jung's teacher, the psychiatrist Eugene Bleuler, fully operationalized the process with the creation of his inkblot test as a tool to uncover a subject's unconscious desires and projections. In Clegsography and projection, a machine learning model trained on the work of Kerner, Hugo, Sand, and Rorschach generates a flowing field of interpolated imagery. Figures and images emerge and recede as a process of projection occurs both in the algorithm, a style GAN derivation designed to seek out relationships between images, and the human viewer watching the projected image. So here's some of Kerner's work. The reason I'm showing, well, it might become clearer, let's see. Here we have Rorschach's images for his test. And then here we have the meme, today's common meme, the Pepe. This is the least rare Pepe. So this is the beginning of the lecture. It's called New Phenomena, Call for New Narratives, Contagion, Capture, and Evolutionary Corruption in 2020. There are readings available at my website under syllabi, and I believe it sounds like on the A4D website as well. And then this, of course, is a spiderweb graph. This is, someone made this of all the connections between Cambridge Analytica and a lot of other sort of shadowy institutions. Here we are zooming in on a little bit. If you look slightly above center and to the left, you'll see CNP. We'll be looking at the CNP a little bit later, but we won't be doing any more spiderweb graphs during this presentation. Okay, so we'll start with contagion. The humble zombie ant. So this is an ant that has been zombified by a species of fungus and made to do things very unnatural for an ant. So new zombie ant fungi found. The world just got a little weirder. Scientists have identified 4 new species of brain-controlling fungi that turn ants into zombies that do the parasite's bidding before it kills them. Identified from samples collected at 2 sites in Brazil's tropical rainforest, each of the 4 species specializes in controlling a different species of carpenter ant. The original zombie ant fungus was first identified in 1865, and it seems to exist around the world. Once it infects an ant, the fungus uses as yet unidentified chemicals to control the ant's behavior. It directs the ant to leave its colony, a very un-ant-like thing to do, and bite down on the underside of a leaf, the ant's soon-to-be resting place. Once it is killed by the fungus, the ant remains anchored in place thanks to its death grip on the leaf. Ultimately, the fungus produces a long stalk that protrudes from the ant's head, shooting spores out in hope of infecting other ants. 2 of the 4 newly discovered species also sprouted smaller stalks elsewhere, including from the victim's feet and lower leg joints, the equivalent of knees. The spores of the 4 species also had distinct features and germination processes. Okay, so this is a book called The Meme Machine by Susan Blackmore. Blackmore was a I'm hearing myself feedback. Is there something underneath that? Blackmore was a sort of protege of Richard Dawkins, who of course wrote The Selfish Gene.
But Dawkins was interested in universal Darwinism, the idea that there could be other replicators apart from genes. And as an example, he said, well, look around you in human life and culture. Every time we imitate somebody else, pass an idea from one person to another, it's being copied with variation and selection. It is a replicator. The ideas, the memes, the behaviors, the skills, the stories, the habits, all these memes are competing to get copied by our brains. We are meme machines copying the memes. And I lay there in bed, day after day, reading about memes, thinking about it. And in that situation, cut off from the world, but thinking intensely, I had a lot of ideas, new ideas. Once you get the idea of memes, everything looks different. And I think, can give you a completely new idea, not only of what it is to be a human today in the world of the internet, but how we humans got to be the way we are. The basic idea of memes is this. It starts with Darwin's amazing idea. Darwin had what Dennett calls, and I absolutely agree with him, the best idea anybody ever had. I can't imagine having the best idea anybody ever had. I give that accolade to Darwin. His idea was this. if ever you have something which is copied, doesn't matter what it is, it's copied, and it's copied with variation, so you've got slightly different versions of the copies. Some of those copies survive when most of them are killed off, and they go on and get copied again, then you must get evolution. The later copies will be better adapted to whatever situation in which the selection happened than the original copies were.
Another take on memetics is this idea of thought contagion. This is Aaron Lynch. This is from the late 90s, early 2000s. Since then, this idea of thought contagion has become less popular in academic circles, but I think it's actually still useful for some of the ways that we think about memetics. So here's from Aaron Lynch. The epidemiology of ideas. Different modes of thought contagion usually occur together. Thus, a single idea has a propagative profile consisting of any advantages it has in each mode. Memetic theory analyzes these propagative profiles in a manner resembling that used in epidemiology. An epidemiologist might conclude, for instance, that sneezing out virus particles accounts for much of the common cold's propagation. The virus's way of causing sneeze-triggering nasal irritation is what makes the cold so common. Similarly, a memeticist might determine that the weapons shortage belief spreads largely by proselytism. The idea's way of producing proselytism, motivating fear, is what makes the belief so common. Memetics is in part an epidemiology of ideas. Forming new ideas. Thought contagions have an impact on thought creation, as new ideas that seem spontaneously created often derive from pre-existing ideas. Frequently, this happens by either altering, building upon, or fusing earlier notions. Yet usually much more than just having a precursor belief is necessary for a person to generate a new idea. Any one adherent of the earlier idea may be quite unlikely to form the new idea. But as the precursor spreads, the odds increase that someone will make that creative leap. Thought contagions, therefore, shape creative output at the population level. Recombining ideas. Thought contagion also reshuffles old ideas into novel combinations. Sometimes the recombined beliefs hold new implications that spark completely new ideas. Other times, newly combined beliefs become novel thought contagions in their own right. Recombination affects, for example, the belief in an imminent and inevitable doomsday. The doomsday idea alone probably does not inspire much proselytism. It might even inspire decisions to let others remain blissfully ignorant of their impending fate. Now consider the religious belief that whoever dies an unbeliever goes to hell. The hell belief alone motivates hosts to convert friends and loved ones. It stirs enough proselytic energy to spread itself far and wide in the population. Far and wide enough that with near certainty it spreads to someone who holds or adopts the doomsday belief. So the hell idea's contagiousness may get most of the credit for generating the just hell doomsday combination. So this came out last week. Some of you probably heard about it. It's from Cornell. It's part of the Cornell Alliance for Science. I'll just read a little bit of the abstract about halfway down. They're calling transmission about the coronavirus pandemic an infodemic. I'll start at the top, actually. The COVID-19 pandemic has unfolded alongside what the World Health Organization has termed an infodemic of misinformation. This study identifies and analyzes the most prominent topics of COVID-related misinformation that emerged in traditional media between January 1 and May 26, 2020, based on a total sample of over 38 million articles published in English language media around the world. To our knowledge, our analysis is the first comprehensive survey of the traditional and online media landscape on this issue. We found that media mentions of US President Donald Trump within the context of COVID-19 misinformation made up by far the largest share of the infodemic. Trump mentions comprised 37.9% of the overall misinformation conversation, well ahead of any other topics. We conclude that the President of the United States was likely the largest driver of the COVID misinformation infodemic. Only 16.4% of the misinformation conversation was fact-checking in nature, suggesting that the majority of COVID misinformation is conveyed by the media without question or correction. Here we see a little chart with an extreme spike there, over 30,000 mentions. Right after the disinfectant, the putting disinfectant inside your body press conference. Keck, Kux, and the God Emperor Trump, a measurement study of 4chan's politically incorrect forum and its effects on the web. So this, of course, is our more common or our more current definition of meme, right? So these memes originating in 4chan, often featuring Pepe the Frog. There's a new documentary about Pepe and his capture, by the way, called Feels Good Man, that I enjoyed and suggest checking out. Other Pepe, the most famous Pepe probably. And this Pepe, made by Matt Fury, actually after the sort of capture of Pepe by the far right. This is the God Emperor Trump meme that they sort of mentioned in the title there.
Когда вам будут говорить, что этот документальный фильм не имеет отношения к реальности, большинство фактов нельзя проверить, доказательства сфабрикованы, а описанный заговор лишь плод параноидального воображения авторов. Верьте, так легче жить.
Знаете ли вы, что право на частную жизнь – это давно пустой звук? На каждого из нас заведено досье, в котором собрана полная информация обо всех привычках человека, о том, что он говорит, делает и думает. Ваш телефон прослушивают, ваши письма читают, видеокамеры ноутбука и мобильного телефона наблюдают за вами, даже когда сами устройства выключены. Когда вы едете в метро, гуляете с собакой, идете в ванную комнату, за вами следят миллионы невидимых глаз. Банк, выпустивший вашу пластиковую карточку, знает о вас больше, чем ваша жена. Помните, вся эта информация может быть использована против вас в любой момент.
Вы хотите знать скандальные факты, неизвестные подробности громких дел? Всю правду, без цензуры. Сначала подумайте. Вы действительно к этому готовы? Это Анна Чапман и мое разоблачение.
So that's Anna Chapman, the sort of famous spy who was kicked out of the U.S. in the early aughts and then became a media celebrity or television celebrity in Russia. So that was another example, I think, of thought contagion in a highly distilled. That was from NTV, which is sort of the biggest Russian television network. Even for a minute, watching Hulk Hogan have sex in a canopy bed is not safe for work, but watch it anyway for some reason. Seemed like a good idea, I think, to people at the time. A judge told us to take down our Hulk Hogan sex tape post. We won't. The Hogan verdict. Some of you are aware that Gawker was sued by Hulk Hogan to, I want to say the original award was somewhere in the $130 million range, something like that. And I think it actually got higher than that. And it basically bankrupted Gawker. Nick Denton, founder and CEO of Gawker Media, has declared bankruptcy. And Lawfare, otherwise known as LOL suits, LOL suits. Reports, tech billionaire Peter Thiel secretly bankrolled Hulk Hogan's lawsuit against Gawker. This is why billionaire Peter Thiel wants to end Gawker. And it seems to have all started with this outing of Peter Thiel in Gawker in 2007.
Thank you. We're going to turn now to ABC News Chief Legal Analyst Dan Abrams. You talked about this some time ago. We didn't know who the person was.
Yeah.
Is this something we're going to see more of?
I don't think we're going to see a lot of it. Meaning, you're talking about someone who is so rich going after an independent publisher, right? So those are the key factors here. That is sort of unprecedented, meaning you've got these businesses that invest in lawsuits, right? They're basically betting on the outcome. They're saying, I'm going to bet X amount of dollars because I think the verdict's going to be that much more. This is totally different because this is personal.
Yeah.
He's doing this because he wants to bring Gawker down. And on the one hand, there's nothing wrong or illegal with that per se. And yet on the other hand, I'll tell you, as someone who owns a series of websites, it's scary. to have this idea that someone could be determined to bring you down.
But as Rebecca said in her report, this in some ways levels the playing field. There are a lot of people who want to bring a suit and it didn't affect the outcome. I mean, the fact that he paid for his legal fees didn't affect the outcome of it.
It didn't affect the jury's verdict per se, but if the report is true, it did impact some of their legal strategy, meaning their legal strategy to remove one of the counts against Gawker so their insurance company wouldn't defend them, right? That's actually changing the legal strategy based on the fact that they've got someone who's bankrolling the whole thing. So it doesn't really matter how much money they're going to get out of it as long as they inflict enough pain on Gawker.
So lawfare has gone on, and we've seen a lot more of it in recent years. Actually, the lawyer for Teal, well, for Hogan, but for Teal, Charles Harder, has gone on to bring many, many lawsuits similar to this, in particular on behalf of Donald Trump. So these include things like Stormy Daniels, Donald Trump, Alex Jones and the Sandy Hook parents, James O'Keefe's Project Veritas, Karen McDougal and Donald Trump. Each legal situation is different. In one case, it's a defamation claim. In another, it's breaking local and federal wiretap laws. In another, it's a cover-up on an affair, et cetera. What they have in common, they follow a playbook created by billionaire Peter Thiel, actually not created by him, but first implemented in the US by him, to destroy Gawker.com. The word for it is lawfare, or warfare via the legal system. New phenomena call for new narratives. This is the title of the lecture. This is Balant Maillart's Post-Communist Mafia State. And I'll read you a few paragraphs. When the norms of the legal system are violated in a liberal democracy, mechanisms of institutional control and the division of powers will more or less correct such deviations. In their case, these deviations do not achieve a critical mass and do not thereby pose a threat to the system. However, if the deviations undermining the legal standards of liberal democracies are not only present in great numbers, but form the mainstream goals and values of government, thereon the dominant characteristics can be said to constitute a new system. New phenomena call for new narratives, which are usually offered by metaphors or analogies based on previously experienced patterns. This system, aptly described as a mafia state, fits no traditional framework of interpretation dealing with the relationship between democracy and dictatorship. Nor does it have a place on the kind of corruption rankings normally produced by international organizations about the countries of the world, since these usually presume that different gradations of an identical quality are at issue, as if all that is needed to be measured would be how widespread a homogeneous phenomenon is. This new brand can only be described by a clear citation of the specifics of the system set in a new framework of understanding. And he calls this process evolutionary corruption, or evolutionary forms of corruption. The organized upper world, the mafia state, nevertheless goes far beyond both the mentioned anomalies in party financing and the underworld's ambitions for political influence. In fact, the relationship is turned around in both cases. The decisions are not distorted by the hidden meddling hand from the underworld, from below and outside, but rather government and the regulations are deliberately adjusted in advance from above and inside to illegitimate and particular interests. The systemic corruption of the mafia state on a national level is therefore no longer an ordinary or underworld instance of corruption, for at this stage of evolution, corruption has suddenly been elevated from a deviancy to be kept hidden to the rank of state politics, of a general practice overseen centrally. This is Masha Gessen's Surviving Autocracy. When some post-Soviet societies developed in unexpected ways, language impaired our ability to understand the process. We talked about whether they had a free press, for example, or free and fair elections. But noting that they did not, as Maillar has said, is akin to saying that the elephant cannot swim or fly. It doesn't tell us much about what the elephant is. Now, the same thing was happening in the United States. We were using the language of political disagreement, judicial procedure, or partisan discussion to describe something that was crushing the system that such terminology was invented to describe.
Yeah.
Maillar spent about a decade devising a new model and a new language to describe what was happening in his country. He coined the term mafia state and described it in terms of autocratic attempt autocratic breakthrough, and autocratic consolidation. It occurred to me that these were words that the American culture could now borrow. An appropriate symbolic reversal of 1989. These terms appear to describe our reality better than any words in the standard American political lexicon. Major had analyzed the signs and circumstances of this process in post-communist countries and proposed a detailed taxonomy, but how it might happen in the US was uncharted territory. So here again are the three stages of autocracy: autocratic attempt, autocratic breakthrough, and autocratic consolidation. In Bülent Maillard terminology, we are at the state of the autocratic attempt, an attempt that may still be rebuffed and reversed by institutional means. The impeachment process in Congress was an attempt at such a reversal. Its failure demonstrated that, just as Maillard has written, a monopoly on political power, having both the executive branch and the Senate in Republican hands, can enable autocracy. The next chance at reversing the autocratic attempt of Trumpism will probably come in November 2020 at the polls. To succeed at reversing the autocratic attempt and to hold on to that victory in the face of what is certain to be a massive and possibly violent backlash, we'll have to do more than vote and more than campaign. We'll have to engage both formal and informal political institutions, and we'll have to understand anew why these institutions exist. Here's the Freedom House kind of international chart of relative freedom or unfreedom in different states around the world. You can see that, I believe this is from 2016, maybe 2017. US considered free. This is the trend from 2019 to 2020. US is considered neutral, significantly less free than previously. And here's a small chart from the trajectory of the United States from 2016 to, I believe, 2018. Okay, so capture. There are a variety of forms of capture. I know I only have a couple minutes left, but I'll try to get to what I can. Regulatory capture, FDA, lobbyists, pharmaceutical industry, pharmaceutical lobby, and the regulatory agency, all the same people, just moving around. Regulatory capture, rolling out legislation, rolling it back up, reforms and corruption. We have judicial capture in the form of capturing the courts. All of this is what's going on right now. And we also have, interestingly, and this hasn't really ever happened in the US, the capture of the Justice Department. Ann Nelson wrote a fantastic book called The Shadow Network based on some leaked material from a few years ago. It's called, the subtitle is Media, Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right. She's speaking about a network called the CMP, or the Council for National Policy. And I'll just show you a little bit of this video regarding the CMP, and then I'll call it a lecture. We didn't get to the positive stuff, alas, but there are some things that we can do. Obviously, the main one being go vote and encourage people that you know.
This group was made up of fundamentalists, political strategists from the Goldwater campaign, and a lot of oil interests, and they had a long-term strategy that was to capitalize on Reagan's victory to really create a plan to take over the entire government, and they've been working on it for 40 years.
And did they do it because they saw an opportunity, or because they were afraid when they looked at the changing demographics of this country and a lot of what they believed in? Clearly, they were against a woman's right to choose, against gay rights, etc. Did they do this more out of fear or out of opportunity?
I think it was both, Richard, because Reagan gave them an opportunity to put their people into government and to start reorganizing aspects of the government. They were very much against environmental regulations. They were against taxation and social programs. So they got to start with the Reagan administration. But they also realized that the demographics of the U.S. were becoming younger, and women and minority groups were getting more power and influence. So if they didn't move quickly to change the rules, they were threatened with losing out in the long term.
You, as they say, follow the money throughout this book, and there's a lot of principles you look at. Two families in particular. You followed the Koch brothers and the DeVos family. Talk about how there's a common thread line here, and what did they want for a return on investment?
Well, the Koch brothers obviously had their roots in the oil industry, and they wanted to do away with environmental regulations as well as taxes. They didn't have much of a religious component to their philosophy, but they were really free market absolutists with very little sympathy for anyone who didn't have the resources. The DeVos family came from this Amway fortune and from Michigan, from a very conservative Calvinist sect, but they also fought against regulations. And when the federal government went after them for violations committed in their business practices, they fought back. They fought back against taxes. They have for a long time fought against public education, public schools, public teachers. Well, I trace in my book Shadow Network the roots in fundamentalist radio. And if you drive around the middle of the country, these radio stations are everywhere. In my research, I found that there were over 500 stations operating that distribute content to some 3,000 more. Now, this is not what we would call journalism in any way, shape, or form. It's unidirectional political messaging, where every Democrat is a demon and Trump is an instrument of God. This is networked now into a publishing house, into a feature film industry. Certainly you have a lot of it replicated on Fox News, and you have a member of the Council for National Policy, the subject of my book, in the form of General Jerry Boykin, appearing on Fox News constantly right now, talking about Iran. So you have these messages occurring across platforms directed at very specific voting blocks in swing states. That's one reason they've been so effective.
Oops. I'll just show you just a quick sliver of this one and then I'll move on.
Moderate Republicans were the first targets of this movement. They went through and purged moderates. They purged Republicans in Congress who wanted to work across the aisle with Democrats. This was a very intentional and transparent strategy. They even paid into campaigns to defeat moderate Republicans in certain districts. So what I consider the authentic Republican Party was the first target of this movement.
I just finished a conversation.
He goes on to speak about, and she goes on to speak about evangelicals specifically, and the way that evangelicals are targeted and manipulated, in their opinion, by this organization. So this is the leaked membership directory for the CMP in 2014. It includes people like Stephen Bannon, Kellyanne Conway, good chunks of the media, the right-wing media, good chunks of the military. So it's pretty fascinating. Oh, it was started by Tim LaHaye, who wrote the book Left Behind. So there you go. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead to a couple of positive things real quick, or one positive thing. We'll talk about the Yippies' levitation of the Pentagon. So you can vote, and you can also make art, I think, in resistance of some of this. The Yippies, of course, Youth International Party, created an event to protest the Vietnam War. And they decided on an exorcism and levitation of the Pentagon to take place simultaneously. So this is some of the handwritten notes. Purification rites, a magic rite to exorcise the spirits of murder, violence, and creephood from the Pentagon.
Protest against the American military establishment was, of course, nothing new. President Eisenhower had warned of the increasing power of the military-industrial complex 8 years previously. But in 1967, a new and frankly weird element entered the Pentagon's list of problems.
Playfulness became increasingly important as police pressure increased. And also, I think that independent of police pressure, playfulness was seen as some kind of an antidote to the excessive seriousness and ponderousness of the old left. And there was a feeling that there should be a youthful, humorous, playful energy. The psychedelics were also a factor. The psychedelics, besides being instructive, were fun.
And we're going to assemble a mass of holy men to surround the Pentagon. And they're going to surround it with chanting and love and drum beating. And the Pentagon is going to rise into the air on October 21st. And when it gets about 300 feet in the air, it's going to start to vibrate. Slowly at first, and then a little quicker. And all the evil spirits are going to pour out.
There were 8 or 10 of us meeting in...
Writing and conducting the actual ritual of exorcism, fell to Ed Sanders of the New York group The Fugs. He invoked a wide variety of forces.
In the name of Zeus, in the name of Anubis, god of the dead, in the name of sea-born Aphrodite, in the name of the mountain of Ruth and Pan and Thespis, I call down the spirits of blah, blah, blah into the blah, 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 you know, and blah, blahing and the blah, blah. And this right-wing nut started on a cherry picker's like this elevated roost that they clean trees with or something. Anyway, this guy was waving a Bible. I think it was Reverend Carl McIntyre. He came toward us intoning, you know, thou shalt rot in hell, hippy dippies, you know, and so I was afraid he was going to ram us. So I was saying things, you know, I'm going to sew up your sphincter ani with 12 troll teeth or something. I don't know what I did, you know, something. And so he got out of the way. And Mailer and what's his name scooted by.
Okay, so that's probably good enough. Anyway, that is on YouTube if you ever want to watch it. I think it's probably called something along the lines of Levitation of the Pentagon. Worth watching. So that's the talk. There was obviously a bit more to it, but take a look at the syllabus and take a look at the readings as well if you want to do a little bit of a deeper dive. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Scott. I had there's a couple questions here. I was wondering if you could answer them. What sort of metrics does Freedom House use to determine the levels of freedom on their map?
Yeah, I should have mentioned that at the time. It's determined by metrics for what they consider to be free media. I mean, I think all of these things are, and Freedom House itself, you know, you can question where it's coming from a little bit, but I think overall it does a sort of ballpark, you know, it gives you a reasonable ballpark idea of levels of things like media freedom, personal freedoms in terms of the right to protest and these sorts of things in these different countries around the world.
Well, first of all, this gave me some really great flashbacks to being at Cal Arts in your class. It was really nice. I was wondering if the dynamic spreading of ideas is akin to a spreading of contagious materials. How might this affect our notions of individual autonomy to the degree that it exists?
Yeah, that's a complicated question. Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, I included in the PDF folder among the readers a report from an organization called New Knowledge on the use of mimetic, or what's sometimes called asymmetric warfare in 2016. And one of the main goals of mimetic warfare originating in other countries and focused on the US in 2016 was to depress the vote. So in other words, they were less interested in coalescing and sort of mobilizing people. There was some of that, but the main interest, if you look at it, the vast majority of it was designed to suppress and depress the vote. And so in that particular study, they show that the focus was on specific communities, and mostly on the African American communities in swing states. And so there was this concerted effort to sort of create a, you know, they call them media bubbles, to create this media bubble, or I think they call them media mirages. Sorry, to create a media mirage that influence people to stay home, you know, and not vote. So this idea of a media mirage and a bubble or a mirage, of course, is, you know, it can expand and contract. It can be as targeted. Cambridge Analytica supposedly specialized in this, targeting, you know, single individuals with Facebook ads and things like that. Or it can be as wide as a community, you know, a national community or community in a swing state, et cetera.
Sarah O'Halloran asks, as a student, how would you seek more education in this genre without scaring my parents?
Without scaring, I don't know. It depends on who your parents are. Yes. I would suggest, I think that I think that Gessen's book, Surviving Autocracy, is really useful. I obviously think that Magyar's book is really useful. And I also think that Ann Nelson's book, The Shadow Network, is, for me anyway, it was incredibly enlightening. I had no idea the level of coordination on the right, and specifically coordination between these different, these forces of capture across different institutions, include everything from the EPA to now FDA. We've already seen it at CDC, to the courts, to the legislature, to justice, and with a primary focus or an intensive focus on media.
Bronwyn mentioned that Timothy Snyder's On Tyranny is also great.
Yeah, I was going to read a few of the things from On Tyranny at the end, and I just didn't have time. I ran out of time. I agree. And there's some useful suggestions in there, as there are in Masha Gessen's book.
Cool. There was also a pretty big question. Can we escape the encroaching autocracy?
Well, Gessen believes, and so Magyar is interesting. Magyar was actually in government. He was a member of, I think he was a member of parliament in Hungary when Orban came to power, and he was essentially forced, not into exile, but he was forced into academia, which is kind of like exile. And so so he's functioning as an academic there. And he watched these different stages of the autocratic attempt, the success of that attempt, and then what's called consolidation. They call the breakthrough, I guess, is the middle stage. And Gessen believes that this election is really going to be, it's really going to be a sort of a test case as to whether or not we can repel the autocratic attempt, and prevent the breakthrough. The breakthrough would be either Trump winning the election or somehow, maintaining power if he doesn't win.
Well, that's a startling possibility.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Scott. That was really illuminating. I just wanted to read this comment from Carrie Tribe.
Sure.
Says, thank you, Scott. So insightful and illuminating, less a question than a comment. When you combine A, the exponential pace of the evolution and memification of disinformation, with B, our human scale cognitive evolution, our brains are essentially the same as they were hundreds of thousands of years ago. You get C, the total shit show that we're living today.
It's the book, the Susan Blackmore book, actually, she does talk about it, and she talks a little bit more about it in that lecture. But yeah, there seems to be, so if DNA is the first replicator, according to Dawkins, and memes are the second replicator, according to Dawkins and her and others, there seems to be a third replicator, which is, the internet and these things that don't really need brains in order to replicate. And that's when it gets weird. I think that's when, and it's gotten weird, hasn't it? Thanks, Carrie. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Scott. Now, Lynn's going to do a little bit of closing.
Well, thank you all so much for coming tonight. That was fantastic, Scott, and I think it impresses even more how we need to get out there and vote. So we put together a lot of information for you to take away. There's some voter registration deadlines that are in the chat, links to that, and various states, they're closing soon, your possibility of registering, so make sure you do that. We've got some voter information as well, resources on voting and guides to the issues we've assembled that hopefully can help you if you want more information. And really important, we've got a group that we're partnering with called Advice, and they have a fantastic event happening on Thursday evening. It's at 8:30 East Coast time, and it is 5:30 West Pacific Standard Time. And it is a peer-to-peer network of students who are reaching out to each other to get engaged with voting and civic participation. It's going to be hosted by Annette Faruqi, who's an incredible painter and professor at Yale University. or at the School of Art there. And she'll be speaking with Prentice Haney and Marshall Shorts, who are the director and creative director of the Ohio Organizing Collaborative and the Midwest Culture Lab. And they're going to speak about experiences organizing and concrete ways to engage peers in civic participation. So I really encourage you to get involved, make sure that you're registered, you've got your ballot together, you talk to your friends, you text your friends, you get out there and vote. And we'll see you next week at 5 o'clock for Christine Corliss. And thank you all again.